So this table saw, based on one of these circular saws, has actually turned out much better than I expected to, but it's not perfect. So in this video I'll show you what I do different if I built one again. My favorite part of this saw has got to be the rip vents. This part worked out really nicely. And it's possible to set it quite precisely, so put the dial indicator here and I'll try to hit the 0. The fence does move by about a couple of thou as I tighten it down. So I should have made this part a bit wider in this direction and this direction, and maybe a bigger triangle here, but for this saw it's quite good enough. When I initially cut the two miter slots in the saw, I didn't get them entirely parallel, so I had to recut this one to get it exactly with this one here. So I made two spacers exactly the same length, and I'm referencing my guide off of the right slot, which is the one that's correct, and I'm going to re-mill the left side slot. I just glued a strip of wood into my widened slot and I clamped it in place with some wedges. So next I'll be able to route that slot to the correct width and the right angle. New slot routed. Now I just need to get some paint in there so it doesn't show up like this. I like how the cabinet comes apart, yet it's really sturdy and it keeps the sawdust inside. Though if I've been using the saw for a while and I reach my hand in there, I can feel the air getting fairly warm, so if I was building it again, I would actually make the cabinet even bigger. I would also make the top of the saw a fair bit bigger because more room to work with is always a plus. When I was working on the saw, I wasn't sure how well it would work, so I didn't want to waste too much good plywood on it. I carved a little notch right here so I could use a screwdriver to pop the inserts out. I thought of just putting a hole in there for reaching in there with my finger, but that would weaken the inserts, and also the table, I don't have that much room underneath to really get in there, so I figured the screwdriver like this is a better method. I added this block of wood to hold the cable so that when I lift up the saw and move it, I don't drag the cables on the floor. I spent a bit of time tweaking where the sawdust goes, so this is a newer, bigger dust deflector which prevents the sawdust from getting thrown out forward. There's also a smaller dust deflector right here which also helps to keep it inside. And these are a bit of a funny shape because they need to accommodate tilting the saw by 45 degrees. This dust deflector is fairly wide in this direction so that hopefully I throw less sawdust this way, because that way it'd be more likely to get sucked into the motor here. There's also a fair bit of sawdust that gets shot out of this hole, and I found even with the case in place there was a slight gap between the case and the table, and sawdust would actually come out here. So I add this piece of wood to prevent the sawdust from easily getting out when it's being shot into that corner. It does get very dusty inside the whole thing, and I'm not sure if the saw is going to stand up to it very well, but then again it wouldn't be any worse than having a router inside of a router cabinet. Getting everything aligned in this design is pretty tricky, and here I inserted shim and I added a screw to push up against here and adjusting these things and some of the cutouts, so it's been quite tricky getting this to align properly. If I was doing it again, I would probably put this plywood flush against this part here and just drill some big holes on the outside and a smaller hole here, so I could just screw this aluminum part directly to a piece of plywood, and then I could put shims behind it to align it. But when I started the saw, I wasn't sure how well it was going to work, so I didn't want to do any damage to this circular saw, and I could actually still take this out and convert it into a regular one. But it's just too much work, so if you build one, you might as well destroy this saw because it's much easier that way. I should have also made this pivot on here a lot wider, which would have made aligning things a lot easier. And I'm not sure, I'm thinking now maybe using hinges for this pivot might be a little bit better. It's been suggested to replace these hinges with trunnions so that when the saw is tilted, you don't need a super wide slot. But dealing with trunnions is just adding more complexity, so I don't think that would be a good idea. I would offset these hinges a little bit further this way, and that would require less of a slot when you tilt it. And if I was mounting the saw just by the guard, I wouldn't need this bracket to be quite as bulky here and here, which means I wouldn't have to cut away as much of my table to accommodate it. So this has been a really cool project, and I'll probably use it in a fair number of my future videos because it's the only portable table saw that I've got. But if you're looking for a cheap table saw quick, I'd recommend you just buy one. And this saw will never be as good as a cast iron table saw or any sort of table saw that costs like $400 and up. It is probably a bit better than some of the saws that you can get for under $200 though.